You mentioned Meek Mill earlier.
Yeah.
How did that relationship start? He kind of took everything by storm. He comes out of jail, goes right to the Sixers game. Like, you know, there was obviously a huge, everyone was playing his music at the Eagles championship parade and everything. How did that entire relationship start?
So Meek, you know, was somebody I met randomly like 5 years ago at an NBA All-Star game. He was with his, you know, now ex-girlfriend, Nicki Minaj. I was with my daughter. We were sitting next to each other. And my daughter really is like, if you grow up in the sports business, nothing really phases you. But she was like the one person at that point in her life, she loved Nicki in that moment. And so she's kind of annoying Nicki and just chatting her up like crazy. And I'm trying to control her as good as possible. And Meek's like, wait a second, you're Rubin, you're the Sixers guy, right? And immediately he started just bombarding me with business questions. I loved it because it was just like me. It was like, I had no idea who he was. I'm like, you know, what do you do? He's like, I'm a rapper, and he's telling me a little bit of a story. But I had no idea who he was, and he's like asking me like, how'd you make this deal? How'd you do that? It was like just the same type of personality, the sponge that I am, he was. And I'd say, you know, the first year, like, you know, he would come to games with Nicki, I'd host them, but we were friendly, but, you know, we didn't really talk on the phone much. You know, maybe I saw him 10, 15 times the first year. And then we just got more and more friendly. You know, he lived 10 minutes from my house. And, you know, before any of the really negative stuff happened with him being sent to prison, he had become one of my 5 closest friends. You know, by the way, we always talk about now the time that, you know, last summer, you know, I brought Robert to the All-Star game in Miami for baseball, and I brought Meek and Joel. We all went to the All-Star game together. And that's actually how Meek and Robert met for the first time, which, you know, Robert was pretty helpful in everything that happened with Meek. But he'd become one of my closest friends. So for me, what was a life-changing experience, and one that I would encourage everyone to have because I didn't believe it was possible, he used to always tell me about this crazy legal situation and about this crazy judge. And you know what? Everyone tells you their problems. And you know, Alex, I'm sure you could tell me this. From people you like, you hear people's problems every day, and most of them go in one ear and out the other because there's not enough hours in the day to think about something. And you know, for me, someone's like, "Hey, this is happening. Okay, I'll send you a check." Like that's the way I like to solve problems. And last summer, he was around all the time. And I kept saying to him, like, dude, like, what's the matter with you? Like, go get a job. Like, I don't, like, go perform. I don't get it. Why are you not performing? He's like, Michael, like, I know you're some Jewish white kid from the suburbs, but you don't understand. I'm on probation. Like, you're not allowed to leave. I'm like, what do you mean? Your job is to perform. How can you not leave? He's like, I'm not allowed. Like, something's not right here. You can't not be allowed to go, you know, perform.
Right.
And so at that point, I started getting involved. I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. Like, he's my boy. He's at my house all the time. Like, this kid, like, here's a kid who could be making, you know, tens of millions of dollars a year, and he can't travel. And so I started getting involved with the lawyers before anything went wrong, and started asking all these questions. And the first thing, you know, we heard was that, you know, he was a model probationer. Everyone thought he was great. By the way, he always told me from day one, and this is what's so crazy. I remember when we were sitting on the basketball court, he said, Michael, I was charged for pointing a gun at a cop. He said, if a black kid points a gun at 10 cops, that's called suicide. You don't get to point a gun at multiple cops like, oh, I'm sorry, sir, can you put your gun down? Right. Like, they kill you. That's what they're trained to do. So he always told me he never pointed a gun. That's what he was ultimately sent to jail for and been stuck in this whole legal situation for. So I tried to help get his probation terminated. He'd been on probation for 10 years already. And the judge called a probation hearing. And she called a probation hearing for 2 what you call technical violations. The first was that he popped a wheelie in New York City, and he put it on Instagram. And a day later, 20 cops show up at a charity basketball function and arrest him for reckless endangerment because they saw it on Instagram, okay? Now, by the way, only because he's a black rapper did he get arrested for popping a wheelie on Instagram. Would never happen to anybody else. So also, earlier that year, he had a friend of his who was jumped in an airport where he was traveling. They had just done a concert, and his friend got jumped, and he went to go help him. And of course, who they arrest? The black rapper. And then they look at all the video surveillance and realize that actually it was 2 people that worked in the airport who jumped his friend because Meek wouldn't take a picture with him earlier that morning. And they then dropped all the charges against Meek. And so those 2 things, which resulted in all charges being dropped in both cases, were enough for the judge to bring him in on a technical probation violation. And so I decided at the last second, he was so nervous, he kept calling me about it. I'm like, I'm gonna come with you. I just canceled my day, and it was like a fluke. I went with him, Monday, November 6th. And I go in the courtroom, And I thought it was gonna be like 15 minutes. First, they take your phone away. Like you're taking your phone away in the middle of the day is like,
That has to kill you.
by the way, I was like, first of all, I was like crawling out of my skin.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think this is gonna be 15 minutes. And judge gets up, and the probation officer comes up first. She goes, Robert Williams, he's a model probationer. He's done everything we asked. We recommend no sentence. The district attorney gets up next, says, we recommend no sentence. I turn around to the lawyer, I'm like, why are we here? He's like, listen, in the history of Philadelphia, no one's ever been sentenced. When the probation officer and DA recommends no sentence, you never get sentenced. So now this thing's gone on for like 3 hours. This 15-minute thing's gone on 3 hours. We're like at halftime. They give you a break. You can, go,
Snacks.
Yeah, whatever. Yeah, it's beer in the middle of the day, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And they come back into session, and I tell Meek, like, you're good. Don't worry about it. So she gets up. She says, I'm sentencing you. Like, wait, what's the sentence? Like, huh? So like, Michael, can you speak? So I get up and I basically talk about what I've done in the state of Pennsylvania, the companies I've built. We created tens of thousands of jobs at my old company. We just bought Majestic, which has a big plant in Pennsylvania, and all the employees' jobs that we saved, and my involvement with the Philadelphia Sixers. And then I talk about my relationship with Meek, and how well he knows my daughter, my mom, how he's been to the All-Star game and spent time with Rob Manfred, and how he's spent time with many of the commissioners and all my friends and Robert, and basically this is a guy who I think can unite people in a world where people are being divided. And like, we need to help this guy to make an impact in the world in a positive way, not break his life down. And I'm giving like what I thought was a pretty good speech, like a Jerry Maguire speech.
Yeah.
I mean, to myself, I was crushing it.
Right.
She wouldn't make eye contact with me.
Oh my God.
And part of me is like, I'm ready to say like hello, like lady, look up.
My eyes are up here.
Yeah, like hello,
Yeah,
But I'm in her courtroom. I'm going to play by her rules. So I sit back down. She never looks at me, and the whole tone during this what was 5 or 6 hour session was unfathomable. I'll never be able to explain it to you. You'd have to be in the courtroom to see how she conducts herself. And then she sentences him to 2 to 4 years in state prison. And literally his eyes turn pink, and basically he'll never want to admit this because he's a rapper. Basically his eyes turn pink, and tears start coming out of his eyes. I have the same reaction. And I was randomly sitting next to Desiree Perez, who I had never met, from Rock Nation. I looked at her, I said, I'm not stopping until this guy's out of prison, period, end of story. She introduces herself, she goes, I'm not stopping. And literally, that was a life-changing moment for me. And like, I literally, between Des and myself, we probably spent a third of our time in the next, between November 6th and April 24th when he was released, on working on getting him out of jail. Because what happened was so wrong. And you know what? If you told me the story about your friend, I'd say, yeah, it's really fucked up. But for it to happen to one of your closest friends,
right.
Like I've worked too hard in my life and accomplished too much to sit back and watch that happen to one of my closest friends. So I just said, you know what? Work's important, but it's not that important. This is like, this is part, like this has to come first.
Wow. Wow.